Dangerous peace deals, eliminating the dollar, rescued hostages, the future of the Pope, the idiotic attack on Teslas. All of these are subjects of major articles in our latest Trumpet print magazine, which we're going to dive into today on Trumpet World. Will Trump's peace plans fly? That's the cover of our latest Trumpet print edition, a jam-packed edition. And I'm joined by Trumpet Assistant Managing Editor Philip Nice to talk about it.
Good to be here. Thanks, Mr. Palmer.
Thanks for, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And before we dive into the specifics, perhaps you can talk about the challenges with this issue and the process of putting this together overall. I think I felt like we were in a unique position with this article with this edition, where the previous edition, we ended up changing things, rewriting things, adding things in right up until the last possible moment. So then when this issue rolled around, we had much less time than normal since the previous articles were done. And then at the same time, this is our May-June issue. This is one of our 2 bi-monthly issues to allow a little bit of a break in our schedule for the spring holy days. So this is an issue that had to stay current for longer. It's going to be another couple of months before we have an opportunity to comment on the world news, at least in the print format. So, I mean, what was your view of trying to wrestle with some of those challenges this time around?
Well, that's a good question. I often take a broader view anyway. I'm a slower thinker and a broader thinker. So as I'm looking at this table of contents, it's talking about heed the watchman. It's talking about face the truth about nuclear war. It's evaluating President Trump's foreign policy as a whole. And I got an article in here about the mystery of Israel. And so to me, there's a lot of value in those timeless things, or even things that are not quite timeless, but just a little more enduring than the news of the day. And I think that's something that the Trumpet is really unique. The Trumpet is where you can find the news of the day, the tariffs, and then that connects to Bible prophecy, and then Bible prophecy connects to man's place in the universe. And those connections can be drawn.
And I enjoyed the perspective that Mr. Hilliker, the managing editor, brought to when he published his Trumpet brief. When we first put this up on the website, I think he titled that "How to Avoid Headline Whiplash," and he kind of talked about how we were almost kicking ourselves that this went to print and we didn't rush anything in there on trade wars. Well, what he wrote there was the big picture, future-focused understanding enables you to distinguish signal from noise, to know what is genuinely important, and to see where the arc of current events are leading.
Right. I completely agree with that. And we'd sometimes get ourselves into that situation when Mr. Fleury, the editor-in-chief, Gerald Fleury, writes about something that, I mean, it's in the headlines somewhere, but it's buried, whether it's, Lebanon or something about Ukraine or, something. Right now he's talking about the militarization of Germany, or he has been. And then it comes along later, but we've already covered it. He's already covered it in the Trumpet. And that's a good problem to have, to be ahead of the news. We covered the tariffs early in the issue before this one. But now they're heating up. But again, the real value is that we can connect it to something that's been written for thousands of years in the Bible. So it's not timely in that way, and yet it is more timely than anything out there on the BBC or New York Times or what have you.
And it is a work of faith, and all of these articles are put together with a lot of prayer, and the overall issue put together with a lot of prayer. And I think you do see that in the way that this issue feels more relevant, say, now than it did a week ago, maybe even 2 weeks ago. I mean, that cover, "Will Trump's Peace Plans Fly?" I'm looking over the news this morning and circulating some headlines internally, and the big story really is all about peace plans. And it's about Witkoff, and he's been on Fox News last night and talking about the details of what he's been negotiating with Iran over the weekend. And it's looking very like the Obama nuke deal version 2. and something that Donald
Right.
Trump saw was catastrophic in his first term and canceled it, and now just going straight back to doing exactly the same thing. So this cover article, I mean, it talks all about Witkoff and Donald Trump and mistakes that they've made in pursuing these peace deals. Before we get to that, though, I thought from the editor on the first page does set up this discussion about peace deals in a profound way. It's a short, very short, one-page article, Face the Truth about nuclear war. It talks about Germany wanting to get more nuclear weapons. South Korea's talked about nuclear weapons. Japan has been saying, well, if South Korea is getting nuclear weapons, we'd like to think about that as well. And again, I think right up to date, because you've got this week the Iran nuke deal all in the headlines, and then over the weekend, Saudi Arabia saying, well, if Iran is speeding towards a nuclear bomb, we want nuclear weapons. But really, this article is less about nuclear weapons than a challenge to the reader. Do you want to hear an unpleasant warning? And it talks about the unpleasant warning Winston Churchill gave ahead of World War II, where, well, he said, "It has certainly been a very thankless task. It has brought me into conflict with many former friends and colleagues. I've been mocked and censured as a scaremonger and even as a warmonger by those whose complacency and inertia have brought us all nearer to war and war nearer to us all." And he sacrificed a lot to sound a warning before World War II. And the fact that he was so ignored and derided is in itself a powerful warning. We don't want to hear warnings of catastrophe. And when you look at nuclear weapons, it's such a big warning of catastrophe. The potential destruction is so gigantic that the natural thing to do is to just kind of tune it out and ignore it. And that's what Mr. Fleury says in this article. That is the biggest challenge each one of us must always face. Do we want to hear the truth, and will we act on it? Hearing the truth can be the most painful experience of our lives. It often means ripping wrong ideas from our proud minds, but the truth greatly enriches our lives and sets us free.
Right. I mean, this time of year is a time of examining ourselves, and complacency and inertia are two of the biggest issues that we struggle with without knowing it. Usually, it's just we want to be comfortable. We want to be we want to get things back to stability and normality, and we don't want to be disturbed or disrupted just in any way in our minds, even if, as the lead up to World War II proved, even if you see it coming, we do all the right deals, sign all the right, agreements. We are sleepwalking, I think, was a term that Churchill used. That complacency and that inertia is something it's like a drug. But it can be rooted out. If you're reading the Trumpet, if you're watching Trumpet World, you've got some sort of you're not totally complacent. You're not totally just flowing along with the inertia of society. You're alert to something happening. You're looking for answers. So that's a good start. But again, like we've said before on this program, like it's just the start. We've got to keep fighting that inertia, fighting that complacency, because we've got recent history proving how destructive that inertia and that complacency can be.
Right, and I thought that was just such a powerful way to open the Trumpet, basically with this this question: are you sleepwalking? And it's a great setup to what follows. And the next article that does follow is the fatal flaw in Trump's foreign policy. And this is from Trumpet executive editor Stephen Fleury. This is spurred on in large part by this interview that Steve Witkoff gave to Tucker Carlson. And that interview was pretty shocking in many ways, that it exposed a whole lot of naivety. But at the same time, it also wasn't shocking and kind of made sense, because this had been the cover or a major part of an earlier Trumpet print edition earlier in the year, where we had an article from Mr. Gerald Fleury talking about the fatal flaw in the Hamas deal. And now we're seeing the same guy that Donald Trump delegated that Hamas deal. Now he's trying to do deals with Vladimir Putin. He's trying to do deals with Iran. There are some dangerous bits of thinking that were exposed in that Tucker Carlson interview.
Right. The name Steve Witkoff was not some very, how do I say it? Like, it wasn't on my radar in nearly, I mean, I had barely heard the name when Mr. Fleury really emphasized him and that interview in particular. This is another example of one of those things that we were talking about earlier, where Mr. Fleury pinpointed that man and that interview and those sentiments he expressed as pivotal. This is going to affect American policy. This is an insight into how they think and what the results are likely to be. And so then I, like you and the rest of the Trumpet staff, then you're like, okay, well, let's zero in on this interview and this figure and like you said, in the weeks, it's been a couple weeks since we finished this issue or that article, that name has become more and more prominent, right? And I mean, now we're actually dealing straight with Iran and doing like Obama nuclear deal, part two, which, as you said, was something that President Trump rejected and turned around from, and he seemed to be a strong friend to Israel and to Benjamin Netanyahu in particular. And he's dealing with, like the first article, we're playing with nuclear potential. We're playing with a country that has that uses terrorism as foreign policy. The stakes are very high, and you can't go in there with a utopian fantasy, as this article describes it, or a deadly naivety.
And it's a good point you made at the start there. Like, okay, yeah, talk is cheap, and people do say all kinds of things in interviews, and people have come along and said, well, yeah, if Steve Witkoff comes out and says, I think Putin's evil, he's a bad guy, he's a terrible person, he's probably not going to get very far in talking to him. But one of the points Mr. Stephen Fleury makes here is, no, it's a lot more than that. This is not just about nice words for Vladimir Putin. You mentioned that subhead, utopian fantasy, where this is about the fundamental approach that Witkoff brings to his international relations. And there are two fundamental schools of thought for international relations. There's realism and there's liberalism, or utopianism, as it was kind of called 100 years ago or so. And the utopianists have kind of dropped that label because it doesn't sound very credible. They'd much rather, the term liberal sounds a lot more appealing, I think, sounds a lot less naive than utopianist does. But utopianist is really a better description of really what that school of thought believes. And it's approaching it from this idea that human nature is basically good. And if my human nature is basically good and your human nature is basically good, and we have a disagreement, well, building from that assumption, we must be able to solve that by dialogue. We can talk something out and we can find a reasonable compromise, or there's a misunderstanding somewhere, and if we communicate and get to know each other, we can identify that and we can understand each other better. We can clear the air of fear and mistrust. And fundamentally, if we're both good, we can get along and we can have a mutually advantageous relationship. And that's where one of the most revealing comments he said there was, anything can be solved with dialogue. And that comes from that fundamental liberal view. And it's a view completely at odds with reality. The 1930s is perhaps the biggest example of this, and that's part of the reason why we have so many articles from Winston Churchill here, where the liberals were in charge. After World War I, the liberals, the utopianists, were 100% in charge of foreign policy. They treated Hitler this way. They applied all of their principles of liberalism to the rise of Nazi Germany, and it brought about the biggest war mankind has ever seen to this point. Like, utopianism failed in the biggest possible way. He's approaching it with that same fundamentally flawed perspective. And then Mr. Flurry goes on to bring in a perspective that then really only the Bible can add, because international relations will kind of take the view, well, your view of international relations is determined by your view of the human heart. Is mankind basically good, or is mankind basically evil? We don't know the answer. Choose the answer that seems right to you and let that guide your foreign policy thinking. But as Mr. Flurry brings out, we can know the answer. The Bible reveals the answer, and Jeremiah 17 and verse 9 gives the answer. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, as it says in Jeremiah 17 and verse 9. And so Witkoff's approach is all about relying on that fundamentally flawed human heart. And so that's how Mr. Flurry can have this article that knew nothing about Witkoff meeting with Iranian officials in Oman this weekend, yet still feels bang up to date, because it gets to the root cause of why Witkoff's diplomacy is fundamentally flawed.
Right, right. And I think that phrase, anything can be solved with dialogue, on the one hand, like we're saying, you think, well, this man's job is dialogue, right? So he's going to go in and say, like, anything can be solved with dialogue, and you can kind of dismiss that. But on the other hand, even if you're just looking at it from geopolitical perspective or diplomatic perspective, every word that comes out of a person like that's mouth is also a signal. It could be a signal of the underlying approach, and turns out they're willing to talk to Iran Obama Biden style, and so, like you said, that it feels right up to date. There's other statements that other people have made that could have been emphasized just as much in a Trumpet article that we skipped over, didn't emphasize. This one we emphasized, and it turns out that's the one to emphasize. That's the thing to know right now, especially about Steve Witkoff, about Trump foreign policy, and about the immediate future of American and Middle East relations.
I think we could bring in another article from later in the magazine that ties right into this subject, called "The Diamonds Are in Our Hands" by Jeremiah Jacques. And I think this is one of these articles that is important but not urgent. So in our drafting process, this is the one that keeps getting bumped out of a Trumpet print edition when something happens at the last minute, and we need to find 3 pages to squeeze it in. So it's been written, I think, quite a few months ago, but I think it's really appropriate that it ended up in this issue, because this is an article about how you do deal with terrorists. And I think when it comes to the craft of writing, Jeremiah is one of our finest writers, and it really comes across in article when he does write articles like this, "The Diamonds Are in Our Hands," that goes through the story of how several of these hostages were rescued. And I'll leave you to read that on your own and enjoy his prose there. But the conclusion that he brings goes right back to what Herbert W. Armstrong was inspired to write, watching the Entebbe raids unfold, when Israel went in and rescued hostages from Idi Amin in Uganda. And he was really inspired by that, and he wrote some very powerful articles on the aftermath of that. And his point was, don't compromise with evil. And this is the opposite of the Witkoff approach. This is the opposite of everything can be solved with dialogue if we all sit down the table. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is to sit down with an enemy and negotiate. And there is evil that needs to be defeated. And Mr. Armstrong really praised the way that Israel went in there. Well, he said that in doing this with Idi Amin, and I think you could say exactly the same thing about how they went in and rescued these hostages from Hamas, that they showed the rest of the world an example of how to deal with this international menace. And they provided an example of daring, courage, and efficient execution in a lightning military operation. And he said that they taught a supreme important truth. Sometimes, whether in terrorist skyjackings or handling the word of God, temptations tend to sweep us off our feet. If we begin to compromise, With God's truth, even in the smallest, slightest manner, it can lead to destruction. And he said there is a striking parallel with this recent skyjacking with Entebbe. And Jeremiah in this, he quotes Psalm 119, verse 1 and verse 3 from the New Living Translation that says, "Joyful are people of integrity. They do not compromise with evil, and they walk only in his paths." And this is this, again, almost like Mr. Flurry's opening article, takes a world news lesson, an important analysis to understand world news in the Middle East, but brings a personal example with it. Well, what do you do with evil? What do you do if you're tempted to do something you shouldn't, or is not good for you? Do you move partway towards it? Do you make some concessions towards that, but restrain yourself from maybe going all the way? Or do you just refuse to compromise? And it's a principle that applies because it's a biblical principle at every level. Whether it's dealing with evil in the form of temptation or dealing with evil in the form of Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran. And an important part of being able to do that is also detecting evil and detecting dangers. And I think that brings us back, kind of going through chronologically through this magazine, to another article from editor-in-chief, Mr. Gerald Flurry, Heed the Watchman. Again, going back to Winston Churchill. And I think we study the history of the 1920s, the 1930s, but we know how it ended. And so as we're viewing that, we kind of like, yeah, well, of course, Hitler's the bad guy, Germany's rising, and we kind of tear our hair out at the time, sometimes, like, well, why can't you see this? Why? But to us, it is absolutely obvious. And one of the points Mr. Flurry makes here is really, well, it wasn't obvious to the people at the time, and that Winston Churchill, as he was warning about that, was very much in the minority. And that most people, certainly most politicians and most that were interested enough in politics to pick up a newspaper, they believed he was wrong. And we know Churchill was right, and so we tend to put ourselves on the Churchill side because we kind of like, well, yeah, of course, I would be on his side if I were back then. But we know how it ends. And Mr. Flurry talks about the way that Germany was rising in the 1930s and shows how Germany is rising in a similar way now. And that the things Germany was doing in the 1930s, like taking their car companies and looking at having their car companies then make weapons, and the way that Germany is now saying, well, we're going to spend $500 billion on boosting our military and our defense. Like, all of those things were happening in the 1930s. Most people were asleep to that back then. Most people saw that and they didn't care. They didn't think it was a big deal. We're doing exactly the same thing today. And so really, well, have we even learned the lessons of the 1930s? And back then, everyone ignored Winston Churchill, who was there acting as a watchman. What about today? Once again, everyone is ignoring what Germany is doing, or they see it, but they don't see it as dangerous.
Right. And I think the enemy here, again, is complacency. I think the enemy, again, is that inertia, because you have to get uncomfortable. You have to take risks. You have to disrupt your routine. You can just kind of flow along with the inertia, and you can recognize that, oh yeah, Germany is doing that, and I happen to know the history of Germany, and I can see the parallels, but not change your day-to-day life, and not disrupt your routine. And that's true on the individual level, and it's true on the national level, as that history proves beyond a shadow of a doubt. There is a watchman again. There is a message going out again. You can compare that message to a very independent source, which would be the Bible. You can look at those prophecies and see if they aren't explained by the message of Mr. Flurry and the trumpet, and then you do have to act on it. You can't just recognize it, agree with it, and move on. there is something that each of us has to act on in that situation. So again, that's what heed the watchman means. It doesn't just mean agree or say, oh, that's really interesting. I've not heard something like that before. But heeding means getting uncomfortable. If you're comfortable in the world as tumultuous as it is, as dangerous as it is, and as fast moving as it is, then there's something wrong. If just if you just keep clinging to those last bits of comfort, it's time to heed and to take action.
It's a really powerful point. I'm glad you brought that out. And one of the things that this article offers is Mr. Flurry's book, Winston S. Churchill, The Watchman, which is a great place to go to get more on this. And really, I mean, that whole article is almost an extended promo to try and whet people's appetite to get them to take a look at that book, and that you can get on our website, thetrumpet.com. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, and we'd be very happy to send you a free copy of Winston Churchill, The Watchman, or you can download it, you can read it online. And I think it's a very accessible book. Not that I'd say anything we write really is not accessible, but this in particular, there's a lot of warnings even from history, and then ties that history right in with the Bible. But you can look at the history and see those Bible warnings kind of already being proven, already being played out. And so it's a great place to go and even to start getting deeper and understanding more deeply this warning message, why it is going out, why world events are the way that they are. But I think at this point, we kind of move on to a bit of a different topic. The next article is a big feature from Trumpet managing editor Joel Hilliker, The Idiocy of the Tesla Attacks. And as he points out here, there's a lot of lunacy that surrounds Elon Musk. You have the most vocal, enthusiastic proponents of electric vehicles, the type of people who would like to force everyone to own electric vehicles, are attacking the most successful electric vehicle company. Some literally so with vandalism, but he talks about even just, or points to just the wider liberals cheering the decline of Tesla stock prices. I mean, if global warming is the greatest calamity and the greatest threat mankind faces, well, isn't falling share prices or a struggling electric car company a disaster that should maybe override short-term political differences if this is about mankind's survival? So there's some lunacy there. But then the way that DOGE, this Department of Government Efficiency, is uncovering massive waste, massive fraud, and increasingly people side with the fraudsters and people that are so obviously guilty, not just of wasting taxpayers' money, but really of embezzlement. And what Mr. Hilliker gets into is why. Like, what's the connection between these different lunacies? And he brings it back to out of control emotion. And there's a profound spiritual reason why the Bible talks about a devil that says that Satan is the god of this world, but also that he broadcasts and he influences moods and attitudes and emotions. And this very emotional age is opening itself up to satanic influences. But then also back to the article we've just read from Winston Churchill and back to from the editor about how hard it is for us to admit that we're wrong. And that people don't, like, if there's somebody that they disagree with, it's just much easier to attack them, to admit that they're wrong. Like, I don't think I've seen anyone. I think there are maybe some legitimate reasons to be opposed to some of what Elon Musk is doing. Like, that's not me, but I can understand some people having questions like, okay, well, I don't really like the role of major billionaires in politics, and, I disagree with this or that, and I think he's being too careless about what he's cutting and Social Security. But, well, this thing that happened, that's massive fraud, and I'm really glad that that's gone. Even if I don't like the guy, well, we should not have had this. This was absolutely egregious. And there's so many examples of things that you could insert there that are just so obviously egregious that, it's just so clear that it was a good thing that it was cut. But I don't see anybody arguing that way. Like, okay, I don't like the guy, but this was good and this was good. Like everyone, they don't want to admit they were wrong, and so they just have to go after and attack Elon Musk.
Yeah, this is an interesting article that really addresses this collision of ideologies. It's just almost like the little cartoon meme of, you put the disc into the person's head and now they hate Elon Musk and take it back out now that, they like him, or they, now it's time to care, so very much about Ukraine. All right, now take that out and put, the issue of the day in. And this, we've talked about this a little bit in the Trumpet meetings about how what this article shows and what other articles have shown is that the things that have always been there are being exposed. And in the same vein of us talking about getting, attacking and defeating evil, whether it's an enemy with a rifle and a hostage, or whether it's our own evil human nature, this is the first step. I mean, in search and destroy is search, right? Is or seek. You have to seek it, you have to find it, you have to identify the evil, and this shows that there's entire swaths of American society that are like very, very wrong and twisted, self-contradictory, and dangerous. And there is an explanation for that. Some people would recognize this and say, well, what are you going to do? Or, wow, the left is getting more strident. I mean, not complacent, some of them. Uh, oh, that's so strange. And no, what are you going to do? No, there's an explanation. It connects to the future of this nation, and it also connects to our individual lives. So we need to know it. And when this nation has especially one wing, one ideology in this nation has been rampant, has been pushing insane things on environmentalism, so-called sexuality, etc. It's a huge warning sign. It's a huge blessing that this is exposed. If you're sick, if you're diseased, if you're poisoned, the first thing you need to do is know that. You need to know that you're diseased or poisoned, so that you can do something. So this is an age of, we've described it as an age of exposure. And this article really just exposes this little cross section of what's wrong with our thinking and where it comes from.
And I think that's a hallmark of all good Trumpet articles. I think you can go and you can find articles that talk about how crazy it is for eco-zealots to be attacking electric cars. I don't know of any other article that will give you the kind of analysis that you just talked about and will take you through and show you from the Bible where this is coming from. I mean, this is, like you said at the start, this kind of has become a meme. This, like, everyone is programmed to think one thing, and then suddenly that changes, or another thing becomes the thing that everyone gets worked up about. And I think it's something that people struggle to understand, struggle to make sense of. People have started using this term NPC, like non-playable character, like people that have this default opinion. They're contrasting them to just like this kind of default pre-programmed characters in video games that don't have any depth of thought. And I've even seen some people say, well, this is more proof that we're living in a simulation. The fact that so many people just swing this way and then another way on this. But if you want to understand that, I mean, the Bible says no. There's a satanic broadcast, and for one purpose or another, he may broadcast rage at this thing, or rage at something, or enthusiasm for this other thing. And if you want to understand why we shift around like that, that's another example of how you need to understand this spiritual reality, and that article gets into that.
Right, and it's something that can affect everyone. It certainly affects the right, conservatives in this country, Republican Party, Trump supporters. Um, that power of okay, now we're really concerned about this, and now it's not so important that we're dealing with Iran now that President Trump's in power. But the principle of negotiating with Iran is the same, no matter who the president.
Well, the next article is another article that feels more up to date now, I think, even than when it was written. And that is Eliminating the Need for the Dollar by Andrew Miller, which this is a subject that has kind of gone up off the chart since the trade wars and all the drama that we've had with tariffs since then. And the yields on treasury bonds spiking, which means that people don't want to lend the US government money, or they're more reluctant to. They need a higher interest rate to persuade them to part with their cash. And sure, this article doesn't deal specifically with Donald Trump trade announcements causing bond yields to spike, but it does deal with this bigger issue that everyone is talking about right now. Can we replace the dollar? What happens after the dollar? What does it mean for America to lose its status as the world's reserve currency? And it brings this into Bible prophecy and the ultimate destination that this is leading, and what the Bible says about trade wars against America and America being besieged and cut off from world trade. So another article that is bang up to date because it deals in Bible prophecy.
Right. And the way I've looked at this and expressed this is that basically all nations are always at war. I mean, they're always struggling against each other, trying to get an advantage, trying to bring down other nations in a way that's advantageous to themselves, trying to time it right. And some more than others, some more deceitful than others, some more able to do it than others. But it's this selfish interest that Mr. Stephen Flurry has been talking about on the Trumpet Daily program that drives everything. That Trump is not the only one, identifying these massive potentials for absolute change in the global economy. And Andrew, in this article, focuses in on the dollar, focuses in on its role in international trade. And again, you're sitting at home or at work or at school, and you don't have to think about it because your society is built on that. You don't think about the foundation of the house is crumbling. That's being attacked subtly, to mix the metaphors. And then when it's gone, everything changes. And so he's identified a vector of attack you might call against the American economy. And again, it's not just against the American economy, it's against the American society, because when you make a change that big, when the dollar is not the reserve currency, when the other nations don't need the dollars that they've been needing to conduct international trade since World War II or so, then your society will change. Your levels of criminality in your neighborhood will change. Like, this will affect the society, in other words, your life. And again, he gets to, this is not just time and chance, and there's a reason for this, and there's a reason why the Trumpet and the Plain Truth put forward under Herbert W. Armstrong, Mr. Armstrong, specifically identified this vector of attack as one that was going to be used and going to make a difference, in part because there was a period where Americans and kind of the world, as Mr. Armstrong put it, worshipped the almighty dollar. And now that's being exposed as not a thing that we should have or should worship.
I mean, that ties it back to this topic of, well, do you deal with bad news? Can you focus on something bad news we don't like to think about? Because you're right, there are massive, wide-ranging implications from the fall of the dollar, which then makes the next article in the magazine something completely different. This is my article, which I probably won't say too much about right now because I might do a whole segment on it at some point, though. Philip, you'll come at this with a different perspective. You may have something you want to add, but that is this article, "What is Man's Place in the Universe?" that began as an article about the Euclid telescope. We just got the first data dump from this new telescope that's been launched, I think about 18 months ago or so, that's designed to give an overall map of the sky. And digging into that, I was like, yeah, there's a bigger story that we need to tell than just here's the news from the latest Euclid data dump. And there's a lot. Really, what I focused on is the more we study the universe, the more we find how special and perfectly designed our place in it is. And not just the position of, say, the Earth around the sun or the sun within the Milky Way, but even the way that the Milky Way galaxy fits in to the wider, this part of the universe being perfectly tailored to mankind. And once you start to understand that, that opens up all kinds of profound questions about, well, why would God tailor even the very structure of the universe around mankind? What does that have to say about mankind? And this is something that Mr. Flurry has hit a lot, that, yep, we need to be able to face bad news and look at bad news, but we do also need articles in our magazines that talk about the hope too. And that, yeah, we need to have the courage to face bad news, but we need the vision of what it's all for. That in many ways powers and that courage. Like, we need that vision. So that's what I tried to get across with that article.
Well, first of all, you do need to do an entire show or very large, long segment on this topic in particular. This article is, I don't know. This is fantastic. This is, again, to me, this is like the print edition. It is timely. I mean, it's talking about Euclid but it just takes you deeper, right? It takes you broader. I mean, literally, like, as broad as you can possibly imagine, and then some. This is such a unique uh, magazine because we're talking about everything from Steve Witkoff to Tesla's being burned, and to the formations of stars, star groups, galaxies, galaxy groups. And they are all connected. And they don't seem like they do at the start. But the more you think of yourself as not the main character, and God and his creation, and what he's doing, and why he made man in the first place, and what he's teaching man through the international events that are happening, and through the exposure of our own messed up thinking, you realize there's a master plan going on that connects human minds and character and personal and international relations to the stars, to the universe. It was reading that article where I think for the first time I've really just started to see in my mind's eye these massive isn't even the word, structures, and the what is being revealed by these new telescopes. And Ms. Flurry's used the word universe beings to describe God, the creator, and the word through whom he made the heavens, which are clearly made, they're clearly structured, and they're more and more clearly beautiful structures out there. And so that universe beings idea is what this article evoked to me. And just even if you don't understand or believe some of the claims toward the end of that article, you have to ask yourself, why is it structured? Why are we able to see it, from our vantage point here in the Milky Way? Why do men have a universe dream, as Mr. Fleury's called it? Like, why are we connected to those stars? We kind of know we are. And so this this article like goes cosmic literally, but but it brings it back to us. It brings us back to why we were born in the first place. So anyway, there's a lot going on with this article and this issue, but I hope you're able to present that on Trumpet World and get George to get you some nifty graphics and music to really hit that home, and the way it hit home with me in my mind's eye as I was reading it.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, well, I'm hopeful that we might even get one or two people that I quoted in that article. Maybe we'd be able to have them even on the show. So it is something I've got in mind. But yeah, I really appreciate that. It's a good point you made though about like all of these things can seem kind of eclectic at first glance,
Right.
but they are all ultimately connected. I mean, this does feel like a bit of a kind of eclectic jump as you go to the next article, which is from Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry. A new era requires a new pope. And I think this kind of brings us back to more of the current events in Europe, current affairs in Europe. Again, an article that still feels very up to date with the Pope making a surprise visit over the weekend at the end of like a mass on Sunday in Rome. But that's got people talking about how, well, he seems to be playing a different role. Like he's been less and less active, but now it seems like the default going forwards is he kind of just like hangs back until the very end and then just kind of comes out and has a few words and waves to the crowd. But increasingly, it's other people that are doing almost everything else. So you do have to wonder how long he's going to continue in that position. And Mr. Flurry's point here is you look at what the Bible prophesies for Europe and the role that the Catholic Church is going to play in its transformation. And this Pope has fulfilled Bible prophecy in important ways, but he does not look like that guy. And we're expecting someone else. And that's where world events are speeding along very, very rapidly. And it's leading to kind of this opportunity to go out into the universe. And that is why God is working with man. And I love the way you brought in that bit about universe beings. I wish I'd thought to include that in the article itself. But this time where man is ruling over man and God is allowing us to harm ourselves and make all of these mistakes so that we can learn that his law is the only way that is ever going to work and bring that out then on out into this vast universe. That time of man ruling over man is very quickly coming to an end. And a change in Pope is a significant milestone that we're expecting very shortly on that kind of countdown.
Absolutely. And I mean, human beings are looking for answers. They're looking for explanations. That they're seeing some of the insanity of certain ideologies. They're seeing the danger of the weapons of mass destruction. And many are looking to this unique book in all of human history, the Holy Bible, and looking for, does our Creator give us some answers? Does He tell us what to do? And that's a wonderful attitude to have. There are many people, institutions out there ready and willing to tell you what God says, right? So even once you've gotten to that step, you've got to be vigilant. You've got to understand that Jesus Christ himself said that there would be false teachings about Jesus Christ. Go to the Bible and really go to God and plead with God to show you what the truth is, because there's all kinds of, even if you make it that far, there's all kinds of explanation. So looking at this institution, which holds out its explanations for creation and the universe and what Europe should be doing right now, you have to be vigilant. You have to know what the Bible says, and this article really zeroes in on something very specific and very concrete that you can look at, and again, as you said, just plays right into into Bible prophecy. And then as you see these things happen, as you see these things unfold in these nations, um, then you can be more and more confident in the Bible, in its prophecies, and in its, promise for human potential.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think maybe we could have even included that article about the popes in when we were talking about the way of peace, because
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, this is a religious institution that a lot of people believe and follow, but that also promote itself as a peace negotiator. And the next round of Iran talks is scheduled to take place in Rome, and I have no idea if the Vatican will be involved in those or not. But Rome, the Vatican is the reason why Rome is a go-to spot for peace talks. There's that association between the Catholic Church and peace deals. But these are something you have to prove to yourself. Is this God's church? Can you prove it? Can you prove it from the Bible? Can you take what it teaches and can you, hold up the rigid measuring stick of the Bible's word and see where that comes from? But it does tie in almost a bit to our next article again that I probably should have lumped into this way of peace section from Mihailo Zekic, Will Lebanon Make Peace with the Jews? That does talk about a peace pact where they will be deceived. And they will think that they have that peace with Lebanon, that Europe will be involved probably in that peace negotiation. And certainly Europe and the Catholic Church will be involved in a betrayal of Israel. So again, another example of flawed peace deal, and one that the Bible prophesies in advance.
Yeah, well, this article about Israel and its security situation is you could almost use it as an acid test of Bible prophecy because of how specific the Bible prophecy is. We've been talking in broader terms about some things, but the Bible's also surprisingly specific in its prophecies with the Vatican, for example, and with Israel and Lebanon as another example. Toward the end, it talks about this hidden reality. It says Psalm 83 forecasts a coalition of Middle Eastern peoples. And it says, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against you, the tabernacles of Edom. And it lists off Ishmaelites, Moab, Agarenes, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistines, Tyre, and Asher. And if you're reading the Bible, and it's just surprising how specific this is. It's in a psalm. It's in Psalm 83. And if I were just reading the Bible just by myself, I would just keep going because I would not know what to think about that. So this is an example where you need the Bible and you need God to explain it. And this Psalm 83 is explained in that it's a prophecy. It's a forecast of specific nations. I mean, it really lists off very specific nations there, and who they are opposing. And so, to me, this is just amazing how specific this is, and how the Trumpet and Mr. Fleury in particular for years now has said this is what this prophecy means. It's going to happen in our generation. And this is talking about an alliance that's building right now involving Europe and all these Middle Eastern enemies. And then it's interesting which it includes and which ones it excludes, and how it fits in with other prophecies that name specific nations. So to me, it's just a wonder that the Bible is this specific in its prophecies, and that the Trumpet is able to give you specifically what's going to happen with Lebanon, with Israel.
And then the next article, I think, brings up, in terms of this point you've been making about big picture articles that are important, not necessarily urgent. This might be the epitome of that, The Mystery of Israel by Mr. Gerald Fleury, where this comes up so much on this show, where Bible prophecy revolves around the nations of Israel. I mean, we were just talking about a Bible prophecy that revolves around Judah, one of the tribes of Israel. And I think there are a lot of questions that naturally come from that. Well, why? Why does Bible prophecy only revolve around this one particular nation? why isn't China or the descendants of ancient Assyria or Egypt given equal priority with
Right.
Israel? And I feel like we're always giving brief explanations for that on
Right.
this show. But this is an opportunity to really dig in and get a good, deep, proper answer. You study that alongside your Bible and understand not just the facts of, okay, God is working through Israel and this is what the Bible says, but this is why God did it that way. And Mr. Flurry, ultimately in this article, he's pointing to Mystery of the Ages, Mr. Armstrong's free book that you can go and you can get on our website. That really is a great resource for understanding all of the Bible, and there's a chapter there on the mystery of Israel. But this adds some deep thoughts to that from Mr. Flurry, and kind of gets a lot of the message across there, but in a very succinct way too. It's just it's under 3 pages, and helps explain why so much of Bible and world events revolves around these one peoples.
Right. I teach the kindergarten Bible class, and we're going through the early parts of the Bible, and I show them, I open the Bible and I say, okay, this much is about all of human history, the first, 11, 12 chapters. And this much, the entire rest of the Bible is about the descendants of Abraham, and the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, specifically, not even all the descendants of Abraham. So I remember learning that when I was a teenager. I said, wait a minute, the Bible's that exclusively about Israel, the descendants of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. All, as Mr. Armstrong puts it, all other nations are mentioned basically, like Psalm 83, just in relation to Israel or because they're interacting with Israel. Wait a minute. He's the God of all human beings. He's the creator of all human beings. Does he have are they his favorites? Or are they better? Well, he specifically says they're not better and they're maybe worse. Like he picked them. He definitely picked them when they were the least of the nations to bring them out of Egypt. And but he doesn't. I mean, and Mr. Armstrong asked that specific question: does God have favorites? Is that why he just dedicates this whole unique Bible in all of human history, or unique book in all of human history, is all about? I mean, details about where people were standing, or what the weather was like in such and such a place. And then entire empires are never mentioned in the Bible. Entire, massive swaths of human history are not mentioned. Why is that? Well, it's because we're better. Well, it's because we're special. Well, that's not the case. So what is the explanation? Why is it all about Israel? Why, on the side, like, why is Britain and America and its history so tied to this book about, from the Middle East, from this ancient people, from this ancient man Abraham? What are those connections? That article and that chapter of Mystery of the Ages make you look at the Bible totally differently. Like it tells you where the evil comes from, where the good comes from, and why God is working through these nations of Israel. So that's a fantastic. I mean, that'll just change your understanding of the Bible if you haven't already read that in Mystery of the Ages. And like you said, it's a really good, easy, quick introduction to that.
Well, the next article feels a bit like an admonition to wrap this interview up. It's called 7 Ways to Avoid Wasting Time. Hopefully this interview has not been a waste of time, but you were mentioning all of these articles can seem a little eclectic. Well, here's now one on some practical living advice. But a very practical article on getting the most out of time, which, I mean, it ties all the way back to that first article. And this point you've been making about, well, heed the watchman. Heed doesn't just mean nodding and saying, I agree.
Right.
It means taking action. And so,
Right.
Okay, if you believe that we live in urgent times, well, avoiding wasting time is a practical action step from that. So that's an article there that will help you do that. It comes right before the World Watch, which seems appropriate, seeing as the World Watch is a very efficient rundown of some of the other important news. That kind of brings us pretty much close to the end of the magazine. We have Seeing God in the Fire from Andrew Miller, which started out life as a Trumpet World segment. Actually, it was kind of he talked about that on Trumpet World and then went away and wrote that up. So you can go back and look. I think we chopped that out and put it as a standalone segment. Why My House Burned Down. That was certainly for me one of the most surprising moments on Trumpet World. I had not heard about his house burning down somehow. So we were doing the interview, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this news event actually affected me somewhat." And the way he put it, I'm kind of expecting him to say like, "Oh, there was some smoke on the road, and I had to take a different route home," or some kind of minor inconvenience like that. And it's like, yeah, this affected me a little. My house burned down, and I lost all of my possessions apart from what I could grab. But I mean, we got this article out of it with some profound thoughts and meditations on that. And then, of course, there's more information about where you can watch the Key of David magazine on TV. There's so many different places. That takes up 2 pages plus more on the back page. There's a little bit of feedback as well, just on the end of the World Watch as well. Anything you wanted to add as we kind of wrap this issue up?
Yeah, no, I think just like the 7 ways to avoid wasting time or Seeing God in the Fire, like those are again just they show that there's something we can do. There's something we need to do, and that there's a pressure there, but there's also a power there. Like I can go away and do something like how I live my day-to-day life, wasting time or what have you, how I respond to disasters. How I live my life is matters, and it's connected to these major world events, and it's connected to the universe itself. So yeah, I think that that's the inspiring aspect of taking these things personally, of facing the evil, recognizing the evil that's out there and that's in here, in our own lives and minds and families, is that you've got power to make a difference, and what you're doing on a random weekday actually matters. It really matters, and it really is connected to these larger events. So sometimes I feel helpless to see what's happening at large scale out there, but I know that God's given me agency over my life, my family, and that gives me something to do. That gives me some agency, some power, some hope, and God can come in and give you that power to make those changes and build those habits, build that character. That it just so happens it's connected not only to world events and prophecy, but is connected to the universe. So that's a hopeful message to take from the whole issue.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap that all up. Thank you so much for joining us, Philip, as we talk about the May-June 2025 Trumpet issue. You can get that on our website, thetrumpet.com. You could download a PDF of your own. You can order your own free print subscription so that this arrives in your mailbox every month, or this time it would be, I guess, a couple of months, 10 times a year. We're very happy to send that out to you, and it's free. It's always free. We just ask, I think once a year or so, we send out a little card saying, just confirming, yes, I'm still reading these. I still want more of these. So we're not wasting your time sending you something you're not reading, but something we're very happy to send out. So you can go on the website, thetrumpet.com, and get that right away. So thank you, Philip Nice, for joining us. Thank you to George Haddad and Isaac Lorenz for engineering and production. We have our regular Trumpet Weekend review that will be on Friday. Once again, I'm traveling this weekend, so I think we'll probably just have the different contributors send in their own brief monologues about their region to keep you updated with what's been happening this week. So we'll be back on Friday. And until then, keep watching your world.